When people between 70 and 80 years of age retain certain abilities, this shows their exceptional quality of life. These special characteristics include various aspects. Mental clarity enables them to detect deception and make wise decisions. They can see through scams and protect their financial interests. Their physical condition allows them to cope with everyday life independently. A positive attitude and regular exercise contribute significantly to maintaining health. The joy of hobbies enriches their lives. Whether it's chess, painting, or singing, these activities keep the mind and body young and vital. Continuous learning keeps them mentally fit. They remain curious, adapt to new technologies, and constantly expand their knowledge. Financial stability gives them independence. They can provide for themselves without burdening their children. Openness is reflected in their ability to accept others and live in the moment. They remain flexible and avoid unnecessary conflicts. Social connections enrich their lives through meaningful relationships with family and friends. These contacts promote their health and happiness. Peaceful communication with your children shows wisdom and understanding. You can bridge generational differences. Living with purpose gives their days meaning. Whether through volunteer work or personal projects, they stay engaged and motivated. As for Nostradamus, he was a 16th-century French pharmacist and seer who became known for his prophetic poems. His quatrains, four-line poems, contain coded predictions about the future that are still controversial today. Nostradamus, born Michel de Nostradame in 1503 in Saint-Rémy de Provence, was a fascinating figure of the Renaissance. He developed his prophetic abilities while working as a pharmacist and doctor. In his famous Centuries, a collection of about 1,000 four-line poems, he described alleged visions of the future as far back as the year 3797. His prophecies were written in a complex, coded language that is a mixture of French, Latin, Greek, and Provençal. This deliberately ambiguous language makes his predictions a subject of intense interpretation and debate to this day. During his lifetime, Nostradamus gained great influence at the French royal court. Catherine de' Medici, the wife of King Henry II, became his most important patron. She regularly consulted him for horoscopes and prophecies. Many of his followers believe that he predicted major historical events, such as the French Revolution, the rise of Napoleon, both world wars, and even modern disasters. His methods of divination were based on astrological calculations and nightly meditations before a brass basin filled with water. The scientific community, however, is skeptical of his prophecies. Critics argue that the vagueness and ambiguity of his texts allow them to be retrospectively applied to any event. Nevertheless, his influence on Western esotericism and popular culture remains unbroken. Nostradamus developed his predictions through a combination of astrological studies, historical cycles, and mystical visions. He claimed to receive his prophecies during nightly meditation, using various occult techniques. His quatrains cover a wide range of topics, from natural disasters to political upheavals and technological developments. The coded nature of his texts was probably intended to protect him from religious persecution, as fortune-telling was considered heresy in his time. The effect of his prophecies on society is remarkable. In times of crisis, his texts are studied and interpreted particularly intensively. Many people look to his words for clues about future developments and possible warnings. His working methods were methodical and scientific for his time. He combined astronomical observations with historical analysis and his intuitive gift. His medical knowledge also influenced his prophecies, especially when predicting diseases and epidemics. Nostradamus' legacy continues to shape the collective understanding of prophecies and predictions of the future. His works have been translated into numerous languages and continue to inspire researchers, authors, and spiritualists around the world. The interpretations of his prophecies vary greatly and are often controversial. While some see them as precise predictions, others see them primarily as poetic metaphors and timeless wisdom. The interpretation of Nostradamus' prophecies remains a fascinating and complex undertaking. His encrypted messages are often interpreted in different ways. Some scholars consider his quatrains to be timeless philosophical reflections on human nature, viewing the coded texts less as concrete predictions than as universal wisdom about the cycles of rise and fall, war and peace. Other interpreters focus on the astronomical and astrological aspects of his work. They analyze the celestial bodies and their constellations mentioned in his texts to determine the times for predicted events. The linguistic complexity of his works presents particular challenges for translators. The use of multiple languages and historical dialects makes a clear translation into modern languages difficult. This contributes to the ambiguity of his prophecies. Some researchers examine the historical context of his time. They argue that many of his predictions refer to current political developments at the time and should be understood as coded criticism of the times. The mathematical structure of his prophecies is particularly fascinating. The arrangement of the quatrains and centuries and the numerological aspects of his works are studied intensively. Many people now interpret his predictions in the context of current global challenges. Climate change, technological developments, and geopolitical conflicts are sought and found in his texts. Skeptics, on the other hand, emphasize the role of subjective perception in interpretation. They argue that the human tendency to recognize patterns leads to overinterpretation. The cultural significance of his prophecies goes far beyond their interpretation. They have had a lasting impact on the genre of future prediction and continue to inspire artistic and literary works to this day. Scholarly studies of his texts focus on historical contexts and literary analysis. The use of symbols, metaphors, and historical references are explored in detail. His methodology of prophecy, which combines meditation, astrology, and historical analysis, is valued by modern esotericists as a holistic approach. The psychological impact of his prophecies on society is remarkable. In times of crisis, people increasingly look to his text for guidance. The topicality of his themes, from natural disasters to social upheaval, makes his works timelessly relevant for many. The documented accuracy of some of his predictions is cited by supporters as proof of his clairvoyant abilities, while critics speak of coincidences. Modern digital analyses of his texts provide new perspectives on recurring patterns and hidden meanings in his prophecies. The ongoing fascination with Nostradamus is reflected in numerous publications, documentaries, and scientific works that deal with his work. Modern research institutes are dedicated to the systematic analysis of his prophecies. They use advanced computer programs to identify patterns and connections in his texts. New discussion groups regularly emerge on social media to deal with the interpretation of his predictions. Interest in his prophetic texts increases significantly, especially in times of crisis. Documentaries and television series explore his life story and the possible meanings of his prophecies, combining historical facts with modern interpretations. Universities offer special seminars that deal with the linguistic and historical analysis of his works. The interdisciplinary research combines history, literary studies, and cultural studies. Astrological associations examine the astronomical references in his quatrains. They compare his descriptions of celestial events with modern astronomical data. Literary societies devote themselves to the poetic quality of his works, analyzing his unique use of language and metaphors. Psychologists are researching the psychological impact of his prophecies on society. They are investigating why people seek comfort in his predictions, especially in uncertain times. Cultural historians examine his influence on the development of European thought. His role in the Renaissance and early modern period is being reassessed. Philosophical studies deal with his worldview and his understanding of time and fate. His connection between scientific and mystical thinking is analyzed. Linguists are studying the different languages and dialects in his texts. The multilingualism of his works offers new insights into the language development of the Renaissance. Artists are inspired by his visionary descriptions. His prophecies are interpreted in paintings, sculptures, and multimedia installations. Esoteric groups are developing new methods to interpret his texts. They combine traditional interpretations with modern spiritual practices. The tourism industry in southern France capitalizes on his heritage for cultural offerings. His birthplace and other historical sites are popular destinations. Scientific conferences regularly discuss new findings about his life and work. International experts exchange their research results. Archives and libraries are digitizing his original manuscripts. These are made available to the public online. Publishers are constantly publishing new translations and interpretations of his works. Each generation finds new ways of approaching his prophecies. His prophecies are also reflected in modern popular culture. Films, video games, and novels are based on his predictions. Filmmakers use his predictions as the basis for dramatic plots. Apocalyptic scenarios and historical events are linked to his prophecies. Video game developers create complex virtual worlds based on his quatrains. Players can explore alternate histories and interact with his prophecies. Comic artists and graphic novel authors interpret his visions in visual narratives. His mysterious descriptions are translated into impressive imagery. Musicians of various genres compose works inspired by his prophecies. His texts are incorporated into song lyrics and musical concepts. Theater producers stage plays that dramatize his life and predictions. Modern interpretations combine historical facts with artistic license. Television series use his prophecies as a framework for exciting stories. Documentary and fictional elements are often mixed. Social media influencers analyze his predictions in the context of current events. Their interpretations reach millions of followers worldwide. Podcasts are dedicated to exploring his prophecies and their possible significance for the present. Experts and laypeople discuss various approaches to interpretation. Virtual reality developers create immersive experiences based on his visions. Users can enter the prophetic world of Nostradamus. Board game designers develop strategic games based on his predictions. Players must combine historical events and prophetic elements. Escape room operators design rooms with puzzles based on his prophecies. Participants must decipher his encrypted messages. Online role-playing games integrate his prophecies into their game worlds. Player characters can interact with historical and mystical elements. Mobile apps offer interactive experiences with his predictions. Users can explore prophecies and compare different interpretations. Augmented reality developers create overlays of historical locations with his prophecies. Visitors can experience his visions in authentic locations. Street artists interpret his prophecies in urban works of art. His visions become part of the modern cityscape. Fashion designers are inspired by his mystical symbols and descriptions. His imagery finds its way into contemporary fashion designs. Literary podcasts analyze his text from different perspectives. Experts discuss linguistic and historical aspects of his works. Literary scholars examine the complex language structures of his quatrains. They analyze the use of metaphors, allegories, and historical allusions. Digital text analyses provide new insights into the patterns of his language. Computer-aided methods reveal hidden structures and repetitions. Linguistic experts are researching the multilingual aspects of his texts. The mixture of French, Latin, and other languages is examined in detail. Translation scholars discuss the challenges of translating his prophecies. The ambiguity of his texts makes precise translations difficult. Historical linguists reconstruct the linguistic context of the time. They examine the influence of different dialects and regional languages. Literary workshops deal with the poetic structure of his quatrains. The metric and rhythmic characteristics are analyzed. Comparative literature studies relate his works to other prophetic texts. Parallels and differences with other seers are highlighted. Stylistic studies focus on his unique way of expression. The use of symbols and hidden meanings are explored. Rhetorical analyses examine the persuasiveness of his prophecies. The linguistic means used to generate authority are studied. Narratological studies examine the narrative structures in his prophecies. The temporal and spatial organization of his visions is investigated. Semiotic research analyzes his use of signs and symbols. The levels of meaning of his prophetic language are deciphered. Discourse analytical approaches examine the social context of his texts. The embedding of his prophecies in contemporary discourses is researched. Philological studies are devoted to textual criticism and the history of transmission. The various text versions and editions are compared. Intertextual analyses reveal connections to other historical texts. The literary influences on his prophecies are demonstrated. Hermeneutic studies deal with methods of interpretation. Different approaches to interpretation are systematically compared. Text linguistic research analyzes the coherence of his prophecies. The connections between individual quatrains are examined. Pragmatic studies explore the intended effect of his texts. The communicative strategies in his prophecies are analyzed. His prophetic communication shows deliberately chosen concealment techniques. He used complex linguistic structures to protect his messages from persecution. The ambiguity of his statements allows for different levels of interpretation. His prophecies can be related to both historical and future events. His rhetorical strategies aim to create a prophetic authority. By using astronomical and astrological terms, he increases his credibility. The temporal structure of his predictions is deliberately kept vague. This allows for flexible application to different historical contexts. His communication methods combine scientific and mystical elements. He combines astronomical observations with visionary experiences. The use of symbolic language creates multiple levels of meaning. His metaphors allow for different interpretations depending on the cultural context. His prophetic language contains hidden warnings and recommendations for action. He conveys moral and political messages in an encrypted form. The structure of his quatrains follows a well-thought-out communication plan. The arrangement of the prophecies creates overarching context of meaning. His linguistic codes also serve to create suspense. The enigmatic nature of his texts increases the reader's attention. The integration of different languages expands the scope for interpretation. The multilingual nature of his texts enables cross-cultural interpretations. His communicative strategies aim for a long-term effect. The timeless validity of his prophecies is supported by linguistic means. The use of historical allusions creates connections to the present. It links past events with future developments. His prophetic communication contains psychological elements. He addresses universal human fears and hopes. The structuring of his messages follows astrological principles. He connects cosmic cycles with earthly events. His communication methods continue to influence prophetic literature to this day. His style became a model for later seers and fortune-tellers. The impact of his linguistic strategies is reflected in his enduring fascination. His texts continually inspire new interpretations and explanations. Modern interpreters develop new methods for deciphering his texts. They combine traditional interpretations with contemporary analytical methods. Academic research is increasingly focusing on the psychological impact of his prophecies, examining his ability to appeal to collective fears and hopes. Linguistic experts analyze the complexity of his communication. The interweaving of different levels of meaning is systematically researched. Cultural scientists study the influence of his prophecies on different societies. His texts are reinterpreted in different cultural contexts. Digital transformation enables new access to his works. Computer-aided analyses reveal previously unknown patterns and structures. Literary scholars are researching the poetic quality of his quatrains. The artistic dimension of his prophetic texts is being reassessed. Historians reconstruct the contemporary context of his prophecies. The political and social references of his predictions are analyzed. Religious scholars are studying the spiritual aspects of his visions. The connection between mystical and rational elements is being explored. Sociologists analyze the social reception of his prophecies. The role of his texts in times of crisis is being scientifically investigated. Media scientists are researching the representation of his predictions in modern media. The transformation of his messages is being critically examined. Philosophers discuss the epistemological foundations of his prophecies. His ideas about time and the future are analyzed. Anthropologists are studying the cross-cultural impact of his texts. The universal appeal of his prophecies is being explored. Communication scientists analyze his communication strategies. The effectiveness of his coded messages is investigated. Art historians are researching the pictorial representation of his prophecies. The visual interpretation of his texts is documented. Linguists study the evolution of its textual traditions. The changes brought about by translations and interpretations are analyzed. Psychologists are researching the therapeutic effect of his prophecies. The comforting function of his visions of the future is being investigated. Psychotherapists are investigating the calming effect of his structured visions of the future. The prophecies offer people a framework for orientation in uncertain times. Behavioral psychologists analyze the reactions of different groups of people to his predictions. The different patterns of interpretation are systematically researched. Depth psychologists examine the archetypal elements in his prophecies. The connection to the collective unconscious is investigated. Social psychologists are researching the influence of his texts on group behavior. The community-building effect of shared interpretations is being analyzed. Developmental psychologists are studying the age-specific reception of his prophecies. The different levels of understanding in different phases of life are being researched. Cognitive psychologists analyze the processing of his complex texts. The mental strategies for interpreting encrypted messages are examined. Neuropsychologists study brain activity during the interpretation of his prophecies. Neurological reactions to prophetic texts are measured. Health psychologists are investigating the stress-reducing effect of his predictions. The therapeutic benefits of prophetic literature are being evaluated. Personality psychologists analyze the connection between character types and interpretation tendencies. The individual interpretation patterns are categorized. Cultural psychologists research the culture-specific reactions to his prophecies. The different interpretation approaches of different societies are compared. Media psychologists examine the effect of media representations of predictions. The influence of different forms of presentation is analyzed. Industrial psychologists are researching the application of his prophecies in counseling contexts. The practical use of his texts in psychological counseling is being investigated. Environmental psychologists are analyzing the reactions to his prophecies of natural disasters. The psychological processing of apocalyptic predictions is being researched. Sports psychologists examine the motivating effect of his visions of the future. The application of prophetic texts in mental preparation is analyzed. Economic psychologists are researching the influence of his prophecies on economic decisions. The effects on investment behavior are being examined. Educational psychologists analyze the educational impact of his texts. The didactic value of prophetic literature is evaluated. Educational experts develop special teaching units on his texts. The critical examination of prophetic literature promotes analytical thinking. Curriculum developers integrate his prophecies into interdisciplinary educational concepts. The connection between history, literature, and science is established. Media educators use his texts to promote media literacy. The critical evaluation of historical and current interpretations is practiced. History educators use his prophecies as a starting point for historical reflections. The connection between the past and ideas about the future is analyzed. Language teachers use his multilingual texts in foreign language teaching. The linguistic complexity promotes language comprehension. Literature educators develop creative approaches to his poetic works. The artistic engagement with prophetic texts is encouraged. Philosophy educators use his prophecies for ethical discussions. The moral implications of his predictions are debated. Religious educators integrate his texts into interreligious dialogue. The various spiritual interpretation approaches are compared. Science educators use his astronomical references in their lessons. The connection between science and mysticism is critically reflected upon. Art educators develop visual interpretations of his prophecies. The creative implementation of prophetic texts is encouraged. Music teachers compose works based on his quatrains. The musical interpretation of his texts is tested. Theater educators stage dramatic implementations of his prophecies. The performative engagement with his texts is encouraged. Adult educators use his works for cultural history seminars. The social significance of prophetic literature is discussed. Social work educators use his texts in group work. The joint interpretation promotes social skills. Reform pedagogues integrate his prophecies into holistic educational concepts. The connection between different learning areas is established. Environmental educators use his predictions about nature for ecological education. The relevance of historical prophecies for current environmental issues is discussed. Environmental researchers analyze his predictions about natural disasters. The parallels to current climate changes are scientifically investigated. Climate experts compare his descriptions with today's environmental phenomena. The prophetic texts are reinterpreted in the context of climate change. Sustainability researchers examine his warnings about environmental destruction. The historical perspective on ecological crises is analyzed. Ecologists research the accuracy of his observations of nature. His descriptions of environmental changes are scientifically evaluated. Meteorologists compare his weather forecasts with modern climate models. The precision of his atmospheric observations is being investigated. Geologists analyze his predictions about earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The geophysical aspects of his predictions are researched. Oceanographers study his descriptions of maritime changes. His predictions about marine phenomena are scientifically tested. Botanists study his prophecies about changes in the plant world. The biological aspects of his predictions are analyzed. Zoologists study his descriptions of animal behavior. The zoological elements of his prophecies are scientifically evaluated. Atmospheric researchers are analyzing his predictions about air pollution. The relevance to current environmental problems is being investigated. Water scientists are studying his predictions about water resources. The hydrological aspects of his predictions are being analyzed. Energy researchers are studying his descriptions of future energy crises. The significance for modern energy issues is being evaluated. Resource experts analyze his warnings about resource shortages. The timeliness of his predictions is scientifically verified. Environmental toxicologists are studying his predictions about pollution. The toxicological aspects of his predictions are being researched. Biodiversity researchers are analyzing his descriptions of species loss. The ecological consequences of his predictions are being investigated. Agricultural scientists are researching his predictions about agricultural changes. The relevance for modern agriculture becomes evaluated. El continuity de last paragraph escriva em grande quantidade e escriva em alemo. The agricultural aspects of Nostradamus' prophecies are increasingly being scientifically researched. Agricultural historians analyze his predictions about agricultural developments. The historical changes in agriculture are compared with his prophecies. Soil scientists study his descriptions of soil changes. The pedological aspects of his predictions are scientifically evaluated. Plant breeders are researching his predictions about harvest cycles. The relevance for modern cultivation methods is being systematically investigated. Agricultural economists analyze his predictions about agricultural crises. The economic implications of his prophecies are evaluated. Nutritionists are studying his descriptions of future food production. The significance for modern food systems is being researched. Agricultural technologists are researching his prophecies in the context of modern agricultural technology. The technological aspects of his predictions are being analyzed. Plant pathologists study his descriptions of plant diseases. The phytopathological elements of his prophecies are scientifically evaluated. Irrigation experts are analyzing his predictions on water management. The hydrological aspects of his agricultural prophecies are being researched. Seed scientists study his descriptions of plant reproduction. The botanical elements of his predictions are analyzed scientifically. Agricultural meteorologists research his predictions about weather influences. The climatic effects on agriculture are investigated. Soil fertility experts analyze his predictions about soil quality. The edaphic aspects of his prophecies are evaluated. Agricultural sociologists study his descriptions of agricultural societies. The social implications of his predictions are explored. Biotechnologists are researching his prophecies in the context of modern breeding methods. The genetic engineering aspects are being scientifically analyzed. Agroecologists study his descriptions of sustainable agriculture. The ecological elements of his predictions are systematically evaluated. Agricultural policymakers analyze his predictions about agricultural regulations. The political implications of his predictions are explored. Agricultural ethicists study his descriptions of moral aspects of agriculture. The ethical dimensions of his prophecies are evaluated. Moral philosophers analyze his basic ethical principles. The moral implications of his predictions are systematically examined. Ethics researchers are studying his values about future societies. The normative aspects of his prophecies are being scientifically evaluated. Social ethicists explore his visions of social responsibility. The collective moral obligations in his texts are analyzed. Business ethicists examine his predictions about economic morality. The ethical dimensions of his economic prophecies are evaluated. Environmental ethicists analyze his descriptions of the human-nature relationship. The ecological values in his texts are researched. Medical ethicists are studying his predictions about medical developments. The bioethical aspects his predictions become scientific analyzed. Technology ethicists are researching his visions of technological responsibility. The moral implications of his technology prophecies are being evaluated. Religious ethicists analyze his spiritual values. The religious dimensions of his moral prophecies are examined. Cultural ethicists examine his visions of cultural responsibility. The intercultural ethical aspects of his texts are explored. Legal ethicists analyze his prophecies about justice. The legal moral concepts in his texts are scientifically evaluated. Educational ethicists research his visions of moral education. The pedagogical values in his prophecies are analyzed. Media ethicists are studying his predictions about communication morality. The ethical dimensions of his media prophecies are being evaluated. Scientific ethicists analyze his descriptions of research ethical aspects. The scientific ethical elements of his texts are researched. Generational ethicists examine his visions of intergenerational responsibility. The time-transcending moral aspects are scientifically evaluated. Peace ethicists research his prophecies about warlike conflicts. The pacifist values in his texts are analyzed. Future ethicists examine his moral visions of future times. The prospective ethical dimensions his prophecies become evaluated.